Hi everyone, in this week's lab, we're going to start the fetal pig dissection. We are going to look at the external anatomy of the pig and then dive into all the organs that are involved in the digestive system. So our main objectives today is to understand and identify the organs that work to help with digestion. So we need to identify it and learn their function as well. As we're doing this, try to understand the differences between these organs and how they work in the fetus and the adult. Some organs are not really functional in the fetus but become fully functional in the adult. And then you should also know the differences in some of these organs between pigs and humans. Throughout the lab manual and throughout the PowerPoint, any words that are in bolded means that you need to know how to identify them and know their function. So when you get your pigs from the bag, please make sure that you use a scissor and cut open the bag near the sink so that you can pour the preservative down the sink. You can give your little pig a bath and then bring the pig on the dissection tray back to your desk. So once you have your pig back at your desk, just quickly go over some of these anatomical features. So underneath the tail, there is the anus. There's also the tongue in the oral cavity, the external nares, which are their nose, the nictating membrane, which is a unique structure that's only found in pigs, not human. It's an additional eyelid that helps protect their eyes. Then you have the auricles, which are the ears, the thorax, which is the region that's composed of all of the respiratory and circulatory systems. So you'll find the lungs and the heart there. The abdomen is the structure that has a lot of the digestive system. Combined together, the thorax and the abdomen make up the trunk of the pig. Then we have the tail, the hip, the knee, and the ankle. The mammillary papillae, which is a vestigial organs in males, but it is used for breastfeeding in females. Then you have the umbilical cord, the digits, the wrists, and the elbow. So quickly go over these structures. It shouldn't take you any more than 5 minutes. Keep it under 5 minutes to quickly go over these structures with your partner. Then I want you to be able to identify the sex of the pig. So sometimes on the bag it tells you whether the pig is a female versus or a male, but you should still be able to identify this even without that on the bag. So all you have to do is lift up the tail. Underneath the tail, if you see a flap, this flap is called the genital papilla. It is the flap that covers the urogenital opening in female pigs. So the interesting thing about female pigs is that the vagina and the urethra is in one common opening. In women, there's two separate opening for these. So the genital papilla is the flap that covers the urogenital opening. It covers the opening that serves as both the vagina and the urethra. In males, underneath the tail, all you're going to find is the anus. You won't find that genital papilla. Instead, there's a scrotal sac where the testes are stored. So make sure that you can identify whether you have a male or female pig. Here is another diagram that you can use to identify the sex of the pig as well. So we have the genital papilla and the scrotal swelling like we talked about earlier. In males, underneath the umbilical cord, there's also an opening called the orifice of penis. This is where the penis is going to protrude out during copulation, and you do not see that in the female. So this is another way that you can ID the sex of the pig. All right. So when you lay your pigs flat on the desk on the dissection tray to the side, you can open up the eyes a little bit and you should see the nictating membrane. And this is a membrane underneath the eyelid that serves as an additional layer of protection, and it also helps lubricates the eyes. Please keep in mind that pigs, they were wild animal at some point. So in the wild, having that additional eyelid structure is going to really help protect them against any foreign debris. And if you're interested in humans, we have the cornea, which is where a lot of people place their contact lens on top, and this is where light initially enters in the eye. So imagine having an additional eyelid layer. That would be the nictitating membrane. Okay, so now let's go into the digestive tract. So this is how food is going to travel through the alimentary canal. We're going to go through all of these structures and also talk about their function as well. So food initially enters into the oral cavity, and this is actually where digestion starts because in the oral cavity you have all of the salivary glands, which is going to break down food with all of the enzymes such as amylase that's found in the salivary gland. So you have that right here in the oral cavity. From there, it's going to travel through an opening in the back of your mouth called the pharynx. The pharynx is an opening that sort of connects the digestive and the respiratory pathway. Food is going to be diverted into the esophagus, which is a tube that sits behind the trachea. The trachea is this tube right here that is going to take air into the lungs. Food does not go down that pathway. Food and liquid will enter into the mouth, travel through the pharynx and into the esophagus. The esophagus is a very strong muscle because it's going to propel the food via this peristalsis movement, and it takes the food into the stomach. Okay, so it's going to take the food into the stomach. In humans, food sits in the stomach for maybe around 4 to 6 hour ish, maybe a little bit longer. And the stomach is the place where digestion continues to happen. From the stomach, food goes into the small intestine here, and the small intestine is the site of where the most digestion and reabsorption of nutrients occur. From there, I say food, but technically it's chyme now because when food is mixed in with all the digestive juices, the correct name to use is chyme. So from there, chyme enters into the large intestine, and the large intestine is right here. In the pigs, the large intestine doesn't look like this shape. It doesn't ascend, transverse, and descend. In the pigs, the large intestine sort of is a spiral shape. So that's why it's called the spiral colon in pigs as well. And the large intestine is where water and electrolytes get reabsorbed. At the end of the large intestine, this is the rectum, and this is where your stool is held before it is released through the anus. So, all of these structures are, except for the pharynx, all of these organs are the actual organs that is where food travels through. And the pharynx, it's more of a region, not a technical organ. But all of these organs are considered the main digestive organs because food chyme travels through them. However, we also have accessory organs as well. These accessory organs, the food, the chymes do not travel through them, but they are just equally as important and involved in digestion as well because they're going to help the main organs in the alimentary canal do their function. So we'll talk in detail about all of these organs. So here again is the oral cavity. You have the tongue, which helps move the food around, and this is the pharynx region. It's the region in the back of the throat. All right, so one of the first cuts that you're going to do is you're going to make a sort of a triangle, but a big cut in the cheek area. Keep this cut superficial so that you do not damage any of the important muscles and glands in this area. You can see a very strong muscle. If you tap on this area, it's pretty hard. This is the masseter muscle, and this muscle is involved in opening and closing of the jaw. Moving towards the We have all of these salivary glands right here. The bigger ones is called the parotid gland, and the smaller one is called the mandibular gland. You can just go ahead and collectively refer to them as the salivary glands. The salivary gland is important in secreting saliva. Saliva has three components. The first one is amylase. This is the digestive enzyme that's used to initially break down food. There's also mucus in saliva, which helps lubricate the food so that it's easier to swallow. And then there's also water. So these are the three main things that are involved, that are found in saliva, which are produced by the salivary glands. And then if you want to see more of the oral cavity, what you technically have to do is, going back to this cut, you would take a incision and go from the angle of the lips all the way to the auricle, do it on both sides, and then you can open up the mouth to see more of the oral cavity. You can see the tongue. Right here, the tongue has taste buds in order to help with taste, and it also helps move the food around. There's also the teeth and the hard palate. So the hard palate is found on the roof of the mouth, and you'll notice that there are these ridges, and these ridges are important because they also help crush the food. So technically, if you think about it, the tongue, the teeth, and the hard palate, they are responsible for mechanically breaking down the food by physically chewing them up or chunking them down into smaller pieces. Then, as we move towards the back of the mouth, close to where the pharynx is at, we now have the soft palate. The soft palate does not have the ridges. So the soft palate is very soft. It's going to help ease the food into the pharynx. Now, the pharynx is a region in the back of your throat. And what you see right here is a flap called the epiglottis. Whenever you're swallowing, the epiglottis is going to tilt up and it's going to cover the trachea, which is the opening um, to the windpipe. The trachea is the windpipe, but it's essentially an opening where air travels through. Again, you do not want food or liquid to go down that route because it eventually ends up in the lungs. So instead, when the epiglottis tilt over and covers the opening to the trachea, it's blocking down that path. So if that path is blocked, then food and water will go into the esophagus instead. So this is the esophagus right here, and the trachea sits in front, sits anterior to the esophagus, but we're going to focus primarily on the esophagus, and you can see how the esophagus will carry the chyme into the stomach. And please make sure you take a look at a cross section of the esophagus. This is the lumen right here where the food, the liquid is going through, and you can see all of these strong muscle layers that surrounds the esophagus, and it's going to help the esophagus contract, relax, and help aid in that peristalsis movement where food is traveling through. So again, here is what it actually looks like. In the pig, these are the teeth on the side, the hard palate, the soft palate, the epiglottis, this flap, and then the tongue. And if you're interested, the epiglottis is the flap, but the opening that you see here, that is the glottis. All right, so now let's move down the pathway of how food travels through the digestive tract. So, from the esophagus, the food is going to enter into the stomach. We have the initial portion of the stomach. This is a sphincter, and the sphincter is anything that can open and close. So, this sphincter is called the esophageal sphincter, but it's also known as the cardiac sphincter. It closes off when chyme is inside the stomach. If it were to accidentally open up, you would have some of the chyme traveling back up the esophagus, and it will create this sensation of heartburn. This is called acid reflux. And the reason why it creates that sensation is because the stomach has a very low pH, it's very acidic. And so the reason why the stomach is acidic is because there are these cells in the stomach that creates hydrochloric acid. This is a very important acid that helps an enzyme called pepsin work to break down proteins in the food. So this enzyme pepsin, it works to break down protein, but it only works at a very acidic pH. So hence, hydrochloric acid needs to be released by the cells of the stomach. And in addition to that, the purpose of having an acidic environment in the stomach is also important for breaking down or killing off any bacteria that can be in your food, because not a lot of bacteria can survive a harsh acidic environment. In the stomach, you also see these tiny folds called the rugae. These rugae will help the stomach expand so that it can hold more food, chyme, etc. And then at the end of the stomach, there's another sphincter called the pyloric sphincter. This one will open up when chyme is ready to leave the stomach and go into the next organ, which will be the small intestine. So now we move into the small intestine here. And keep in mind, even though it's a small intestine, lengthwise is actually much longer than the large intestine. So in the small intestine, there's three regions. The duodenum is the beginning region, the jejunum, and then the ileum is the last region. So most of the reabsorption is going to occur in the duodenum region of the small intestine, because this is the area where it initially receives everything from the stomach. So a lot of work is being done here. In the small intestine, this is where protein continues to be broken down along with carbohydrates and fats. So proteins will be broken down into amino acids, carbohydrates will be broken down into monosaccharides, fats will be broken down into fatty acids, and all of these things will be reabsorbed in these cells of our small intestine. And this is important because it is going to be used and be carried throughout our body to be used as building blocks for future necessary repairment, etc., in our body. And it's going to be used as the fuel for energy, especially the monosaccharides, which is the glucose that's broken down from carbohydrates. So, between the small intestine and the large intestine, in pigs, you're going to find this very large cecum. In humans, we have a small cecal pouch, but technically, we have an extension of that, which is called the appendix. As of right now, there's no really known function of the appendix, but in pigs, they have an actual true cecum. And in the true cecum, they have specialized bacteria and enzyme called cellulase to break down cellulose that's found in their food item. Because remember, these animals are herbivores, so they eat a lot of grassy materials. So they have that specialized digestive enzyme in order to break down cellulose, and that's stored in their cecum. And humans, we don't have that specialized enzyme or any bacteria in our cecal pouch. Instead, we just have that appendix. And then moving on from the small intestine is going to be the large intestine here. The large intestine is the main site where water and electrolytes get reabsorbed. Now, in humans, it's called the large intestine, but when you see this in your pig, it's called the spiral colon, because the large intestine in pigs sort of spiral, so it's also known as the spiral colon. Now, we looked at the cross-section microscope slide of the esophagus earlier. I want to show you a cross-section of the small intestine. You see the lumen where chyme travels through, and then here are all the muscle layers which help contract to move food through. But what's interesting is that in the mucosa layer, this is a muscle layer. In the small intestine, you see these finger-like projection protruding out. This is called the villi. You do not see the villi in the esophagus. The importance of the villi is it further extends into the lumen. It helps increase surface area so that it can reabsorb more nutrients. So you see that mainly in the small intestine. It's very predominant in the small intestine. So I do want to point that out. Okay, so we talked about the main function of all the structures in the alimentary canal, starting from the oral cavity into the large intestine, which will end up in the rectum, and then it leaves the body via the anus. What I want to focus now are on the accessory organs. The accessory organs, again, as a reminder, food does not travel through here. But without the accessory organs, digestion would not occur properly or it wouldn't occur at all. So, the accessory organs are responsible for producing chemicals that will go into the main alimentary canal organ and help it do its job. So, underneath the diaphragm, which is a muscle that helps with breathing, we'll talk more about that in a couple of labs, we have the liver. The liver is essentially 3 to 5 pounds, so it's a very large organ. And the liver produces an important chemical called bile, which helps breaks down fats. In the liver, this is also where glycogen is stored as well. Glycogen is a form of sugar that is stored in the liver in order to bring down sugar levels in our body. The liver has over like 500 functions. A lot of the functions in the liver is to help with breaking down toxin as well. We're going to focus mainly on the digestive function of the liver. So bile is produced here and then it's stored in the gallbladder. The gallbladder is a pouch that sits underneath the liver that stores bile. And bile, whenever it's ready, it's going to be released into the small intestine to break down fats. If you remember, the small intestine is an organ that breaks down fats, carbohydrates, and protein. However, it doesn't make any of the chemicals or the enzyme that's needed to break down these macromolecules. Instead, it relies on the accessory organs. So it relies on the liver to make bile, and then bile is stored in the gallbladder before it's transferred into the small intestine to break down fats. Another organ that helps with breaking down macromolecule is the pancreas right here. So in order to find the pancreas, you actually have to lift up the stomach and the small intestine out of the way. It's this grainy endocrine structure right here, and it produces hormones. So that's why it's also considered an endocrine organ. But the pancreas produces an enzyme called trypsin. Trypsin travels from the pancreas. It actually goes through the pancreatic duct and then goes into the small intestine to break down protein. Again, the small intestine does not produce any chemicals to break down protein. It relies on the pancreas. Another important thing about the pancreas too is that again, it's an endocrine organ, so it produces hormones. The other hormones that it produces, actually, before I talk about the hormone, I do want to mention that the pancreas also produces a chemical called sodium bicarbonate. Sodium bicarbonate also travels to the small intestine. Now, what's interesting, if you remember, is that the pH of the stomach earlier was acidic due to hydrochloric acid. Well, the pH of the small intestine is actually alkaline. It's a little bit above neutral, so maybe around 8 to 9. And the reason why it's alkaline is because of the presence of sodium bicarbonate, which is produced by the pancreas. Sodium bicarbonate is there to help neutralize the pH of chyme entering the small intestine from the stomach. And more importantly, trypsin, which is the enzyme that breaks down protein, it only works at an alkaline pH. Usually enzymes, they're very picky. They need a correct temperature, correct pH in order to work in. So that's the importance of sodium bicarbonate. And again, it's produced by the pancreas, but it travels into the small intestine to regulate the environment. Okay, so now I can talk about the endocrine function of the pancreas. The pancreas produces insulin, and insulin is a hormone that lowers sugar level. After you eat a meal, sugar levels tend to increase. It shouldn't increase so much because the pancreas can sense when sugar level goes above the set point, and it's going to release insulin. Insulin is a hormone that grabs the excess glucose and it stores them in glucose from your bloodstream, and then it stores them in the liver as a form of glycogen. Thus, it's going to lower sugar levels in our body. Now, on the opposite, let's say a couple of hours pass and you haven't eaten. So you're getting a little hungry, your sugar levels drop, but it doesn't completely crash because then the pancreas senses that sugar levels is dropping below the homeostasis set point. So it's going to release a second hormone called glucagon. Glucagon, I think of, glucose is gone, so glucagon. Glucagon travels from the pancreas all the way to the liver, and it's going to tell the liver to release the stored sugar back into the bloodstream. And then this is going to help bring sugar levels back up. So the pancreas is a super important organ, as you can see. Another organ that I want to show you is the spleen. The spleen you're going to see is a flap that just sort of hovers over the stomach. And the spleen, even though it's an organ that is a part of the accessory, or it's intertwined with all of the digestive organ. It's located in the abdomen region. So you would think that it serves in digestion, but it actually doesn't. The spleen is actually an organ that's part of the immune system. Sometimes you can think of it as the circulatory system too, because what it does is it stores old blood cells, it helps filter them, recycle them when needed. So it's actually more a part of the immune system. Okay, so this is what it looks like in the actual pig. So what we're looking at here is this abdomen region. You can see the liver. Underneath the liver should be the gallbladder. So if you lift up the liver, you'll see the gallbladder. This pouch right here is the stomach. And then remember, the spleen sort of just covers the stomach or sort of hugs the stomach. From the stomach, food travels into the small intestine and then it goes into the large colon, also known as the spiral colon. Again, if you lift up the liver, you can see the gallbladder right here. So this is the liver, this is the gallbladder where bile is stored. This is the stomach, this little flap that sort of hugs the stomach, that's the spleen. This is the large intestine. See how it's spiral? So it's also known as a spiral colon. This is the small intestine. Now, if you lift the stomach out of the way, this would be the stomach again. If you lift the stomach out of the way, you can see the pancreas. So the pancreas is right here. So you got the liver. Underneath the liver is the gallbladder. You have the stomach, the small intestine here, the large intestine here, also known as the spiral colon, the spleen, and then this is the pancreas. Between the small and the large intestine, this is the cecum. Remember this pouch that we talked about before? And this pouch is where cellulase is stored, which is an enzyme that breaks down cellulose. When you are doing the dissection, please remember to also take a look at the slides of the esophagus and the small intestine as well underneath the microscope. So you also have to be responsible for identifying these structures as well on quizzes and exams. All right, thank you for listening, and we will see you in the lab to go over the dissection protocol.